Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Alliance Bernstein. Since 2019, employees have impacted our community by giving more than 5,000 hours of volunteerism in Middle Tennessee. AllianceBernstein.com. Alliance Bernstein is not affiliated with National Public Radio.
I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. 3 decades ago, musicians Gillian Welch and Dave Rawlings came to Nashville and fleshed out a very modern and influential take on an old-timey country music sensibility. Despite how influential they've become, they've maintained an insular musical world, evolving at their own pace and in their own way. Over the course of their career, Welch and Rawlings have crafted a body of work that's both deeply personal and timeless. Their latest album, Woodland, is a lush, soft rock tinged recording named after the historical East Nashville studio they bought and lovingly renovated. Senior music writer for Nashville Public Radio, Jewly Hight, sat down at Woodland Studios with Welch and Rawlings to talk about their musical partnership, their legacy, and the impact the building itself has had on their music and career.
I love that we get to sit down at this moment. I mean, now that Woodland has been out in the world for a minute, because it strikes me that that album and just where you are in your musical journey, it's a really good time to reflect back and look at the present and look at the future, because, I mean, it's sort of an album that invites all of those things. And thinking about it has reminded me just how exhilarating it is to watch just how you move and use your agency and build your body of work without a lot of external influence, is what it looks like and feels like to me, So I love that we get to kind of sit down and talk about.
You make a good point, though. I mean, when an artist has been doing what they do for a couple decades, aspects of the work are new and aspects of the work are a continuum. We're on the same path that we started on 30 years
true,
ago.
But you're also existing in a space that you did a great deal to help create and flesh out in its current form. So because we are in this space, literally, I'm curious, when you reflect back, how did things that you learned about music that was made here and your first experiences recording here, I mean, really early on, kind of stoke your interest in this place and start to build your attachment to it, your fascination with it before you eventually bought it?
Well, our first experiences here were in the sessions for, I guess they were probably the very last sessions for the first record, for Revival. In the summer, we came here, and that would have been, I think, in 95, and worked in the A room with T-Bone. One of the things that I remember that became relevant later was we did a decent amount of acoustic recording in the A room here, trying to beat some of the earlier cuts for some of the duet things and trying to different versions of different songs, and didn't have the easiest time. What ended up working well from Woodland, from the studio on Revival, was actually the stuff with the band.
Yeah, stuff like Pass You By and Paper Wings, and, it was a great sounding room for a bass,
Yeah.
an electric guitar. And so I think that we never forgot that and kept sort of running into it.
So it was funny to have gotten into this space when we finally did buy it and know that maybe it wasn't the best for what we did, but that later in learning more about the studio was because, it had been renovated over the years, and in the early 90s, they had done a pretty big renovation on the A room and the B room, and kind of tried to modernize them and make them sound more like, it was the early 90s, so they were still kind of going for more of an 80s or early 90s sound with a
Right.
lot of drywall and good for big splashy drums and
Big isolation booths, to keep all the musicians apart.
yeah, they'd carved the A room up into, there were 4 booths in there, and they'd done a lot of stuff that wasn't really tied into the history of the room and wasn't really as good for what we did artistically. And it
Right.
took us a lot of years to get brave enough to be like, well, I guess it's ours now. We can take it back to how it used to be.
And first we got brave enough with the B room, and the first real substantial changes we made in the place were to the B room and taking it back more to its first surfaces, because it had been through the carpet revolution as well.
Of the
The
70s.
carpet
Yeah.
Well, the 70s,
You
there's a
mean-
lot of shag carpet.
Yes, that's what I thought you
very,
meant.
very isolated, the sounds, like you think of like a quintessential record like Dark Side of the Moon, where there's no air in that record. Everything is recorded completely separately sounding to everything else, and it's a beautiful style. And that was kind of, Woodland there was a lot of great work done in that era here. But when the B room was very first built, it was in shape and in proportion modeled after RCA Studio B. And if you listen to the Will the Circle Be Unbroken record, which was done in the B room in the late 60s, before
Early 70s.
late
Yeah.
60s, early 70s, but before the carpet came in, you can hear how nice of a space it was for acoustic music. That's a really beautiful sounding record. And so we tried to take it back to that because we had made, we'd worked in RCA Studio B, we'd made Time the Revelator there, and we wanted to try to have a room here that gave us some of that sound and that feeling.
And we knew that worked really well for us, when we can hear with that sort of clarity, and it's great for the kind of quiet music that we make. So literally the day we finished the B room and we mopped and we cleaned it up and we plunked the microphones down, and that's the day we started making the Harrow and the Harvest. So that was made in the B room right when we got that done.
I was thinking about what could have been other motivations playing into it too, whether you looked at it as kind of a way of rescuing and preserving the space,
course.
or whether you were
Definitely.
also thinking of setting yourselves up with a greater degree of freedom and self-sufficiency, putting yourselves in a position where you could be making the music that you want to make on the timeline that you want to make. Were all of those things-
Absolutely, yes.
We were looking for a studio at the time to have that kind of freedom. And it was just interesting that, when we did get the place in 2002, that it isn't until 2010 that we're really brave enough to start making changes. We kind of wrestled with it as it was for a long time.
Yeah, all we did really was put the glass back in and get the control room going and dump all our gear in here and wire it up. And it was a mountain of work, but we didn't change the studio. First thing we did was got wired up and made Soul Journey. Which, again, it makes sense that was kind of more of a band record. There's only, one duet track on the whole thing?
We kind of pivoted and let the room shape it. And then I was finishing the first Old Crow Medicine Show record. So about half of that record, or maybe a little more than half, was recorded here.
I don't want to gloss over what a significant decision that you made to give yourselves the space for music making, because I see the self-sufficiency that you have fashioned for yourselves, and I don't know that people have really taken note of how significant that has, how that's interacted with your artistry.
And the risk.
Yeah,
The
because
tremendous
it wasn't
risk.
just buying this; it was before that. Leaving an outside label situation and starting
Starting
a
with
Coney,
Coney.
those all seem like very significant decisions that have paid notable dividends.
Well, the
for
path
you.
was-
Artistically.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well-
not so much financially, but But from the very beginning, I think that was a strong driver. It certainly is in me. Like I remember when we were very first starting, some of the first dates that we did, we were booked to do a show in Boston, and and it was in a winter show, and we were going to fly up and do this show because it was a long way, and this is what people did. This is how you travel. And so we tried to, and it didn't work out. There was terrible weather, and
they turned the plane around, sent us home.
Yeah,
after circling the airport for 3 hours.
Yeah, that's why we decided, well, we're going to have a box that has our stuff in it, and we're going to have the car, and we're going to be able to get where we need to get ourselves. Because it was always in the art of writing, the way of writing the songs and being able to perform them, just the two of us, in the way that we felt was complete. Not being like, okay, well, we wrote the song and it'll be great when we have the string section with us. It was like, no, it needs to be good if we just sing.
We have to be able to do it, which is always how it's been. So yeah, when we travel, we have on our person what we need to put on the show. Like Dave's saying, the 2 guitars and the box, we can play the show.
And eventually a banjo on the back too. But I think that for whatever reason, that's just a personal quirk of however we felt like we needed to be. And it did eventually expand out to having a label, and then expand out to having a studio.
And then expand out to having the lathe, and then expand out to having the pressing plant.
Yeah, a record pressing plant.
And that's where we are now.
Which is fairly vertically integrated from
the song.
That is incredibly self-sufficient.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, I think we're really stubborn people, and we really don't like to be stopped by external forces.
Or forced to compromise in some way that we don't like.
And we're really independent.
And we don't want to do any of it on some level. I mean, honestly, like I remember when we were going to put out records, we like, okay, well, here, we'll send the files to this person. You make a digital copy, and then they cut a lacquer and they send it back, and got that. And we're like, well, this isn't any good. And then we tried taking tapes over to someone and having someone really well respected, and doing a day in the studio to try to get one of these records to sound like something, and again listened to it and said, this isn't it. It doesn't sound like the record. It doesn't sound like what we want. And it's ridiculous how far you have to go in order to get what you think is a very simple thing. Like, how you want it, and you can imagine it. What when you hear it and go, yeah, this is good. But
I mean, when you can hear the difference, if someone says, do you want A or B? Well, if A sounds better, you want A. And if someone says, oh, I'm so sorry, I can only give you B, it's like then you start having to make other plans. I'll never forget when we were thinking of starting the record label, I happened to bump into an old interview with Sam Phillips, who started Sun Records, and they were asking him, had you always wanted to do this as a child or something? He said, hell no. I never wanted to do it. I did not want to start a label. I had to start a label. And that's how I've always felt. I had no desire to do this,
well, and we
had to.
Yeah, and seeing what happened to other people who made albums and then the label would shelve them, or who like there were so many. We were so lucky that we made the first 2 records with Jerry Moss, with Herb and Jerry on Almo Sounds, and they were wonderful,
great record men.
People had gone back a long way, and when they were going to sell the Interscope, Gil asked Jerry, look, Interscope isn't going to know what to do with these records. Can you please sell us the masters to our first 2 records so we can start our own label? And he said, yes. And we dodged such a giant bullet in that we were able to pay them a decent amount of money, but get our first 2 records back. And almost no one gets that lucky. And once we had gotten that lucky once, again, you don't want to ever be in the position when you realize something that has been this huge part of your life or that is so important to you is not in your control.
In the basis, it becomes the basis of your career.
Right.
I mean, I don't know where we'd be if on that phone call I made that night to Jerry, if he had said no.
Right.
What would the trajectory be
Right.
if we didn't
had to
have the first two records
We would
to
have had to
start the label?
re-record them like Taylor Swift, you know?
That is very true. But I mean, I went back and read kind of almost an oral history type piece that came out a few years ago. I think it was in Rolling Stone about that era. And it was interesting to remember that at that time, because this was so early in your careers, and because you were releasing these albums under the name Gillian Welch, that people hadn't really wrapped their head around the fact that this is a duo,
Right.
that is the form and the format, which is also, a self-imposed definition that is what you chose for yourselves. And someone could look at that and say, oh, that is a limiting form to choose. But when you look at the big picture, it's so interesting to see all of the things that you've shown are possible, to do. All of these albums selecting who and how you want to collaborate with other artists and continuing to evolve in ways that to me seem not so much like taking cues from what anyone else is doing around, like, oh, this is a moment where people are making records like this, or they're inspired by this era at this point. It seems as though you've been aware of those things, but not particularly bothered by by them in your own decision making about when you want to do more of a band record like Soul Journey, or when you wanted to start using strings on Dave Rawlings machine stuff.
It's so interesting because I don't think we've really changed in these sorts of musical decisions that you're talking about. They usually come from the songs.
Yeah,
They
all
come
necessity.
from the songs, and it all has to do with what the song needs and how can we get them to work and get them across. And the songs are responses to current moments. They are our response to now, and always have been. Even when people think we're talking about times gone by, it's not true. That's just a folk language that we use to express ourselves and kind of keep that unbroken thread of humanity that goes back through folk music.
It's wonderful to think that there's some intentionality or that there's some moral high ground to it or anything, but there isn't. I mean, it's truly an attempt to make the stuff satisfying to us in some way.
Was I not clear about that? That's what I meant. Like, we're always just trying, to be perfectly frank, we're always just trying to get it above the bar. To just have it, does it not work or does it work? And as soon as it works, we're done.
Yeah,
we're okay.
Like if you think about Soul Journey, which has a lot of band tracks on it, but it also has like Gil playing Make Me Down a Palette, or I Had a Real Good Mother and Father, which was a microphone test that I just hit record on because it immediately sounded good, and it sounded good. And so there was no like, oh, I better put my guitar on that, or we better redo it. It's like, no, we like that. Okay, check. Put it over here. Thank God we got one we like.
Let's take a short break. When we return, we'll speak with Welch and Rawlings about their creative process and what happens when you let the music take you where it wants to go. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
From the year I was born, don't look like much, just a flat black phone.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. Our guests today are musicians and songwriters Gillian Welch and David Rawlings, who have collaborated on 9 critically acclaimed albums. Over time, their creative process has evolved, but they've always focused on exploring new ways to make music and collaborate with other musicians, realizing in the process that imperfect performances and going back to their roots can lead to magical moments. Let's jump back in with Nashville Public Radio Senior music writer Jewly Hight.
You've talked about getting to return to what was a very early form of music making for you. I mean, particularly at the height of lockdown, just kind of sitting and playing at home and that kind of exploration and discovery, you know, and you made recordings out of that you released. But I wondered what you learned from, or what new insight you gained from revisiting the mode that had not been your primary mode for good reason for many, many years.
I think, speaking for myself, I had a renewed appreciation for music as a lifeline and a solace. You know, that was a difficult time there, 2021, after the tornado and during the pandemic. And the only thing that really kind of helped me was playing songs I loved with Dave in the living room. That's just what we did.
And we had a little window where the airplanes had stopped flying and everybody was asleep.
The whole world was quiet,
And so you could record in the house, even though it's a few blocks from here, and you could never do that. You get a truck rolling by, and there's a little bit of that on that record, but a lot less than you would think because it was locked down. And so it was interesting to get to try to capture some of that stuff and see what it felt like, and then hear it back and go and think about it from I didn't listen to it that much even to really know, but at the time I was like, oh, this is like, you know, when you listen to the Pizza tapes with Garcia and Grisman or something, or like when you hear stuff that is more homegrown, casually made, there's going to be some warts on it, but there is something special there that you don't normally get to capture.
It's a little more naked.
Yeah.
You know, it's musicians just playing for themselves, really.
And honestly, we thought so. Like, we just did it and we're going to do like a limited vinyl release. And then we did that and it went real fast. It sold out in, I don't remember how long, a few days or whatever. It was kind of gone.
We literally glued all the jackets right here on the table.
Yeah, and in there with the roof still gone. We got all that done and then thought, well, we will do a digital release. We will actually do a proper pressing at some point. But we didn't submit it as a real record to like to the Grammys or anything. And someone contacted us and said, maybe you ought to. And then getting nominated, which I didn't even know was happening. And all of a sudden, like, oh, that's nominated for what? This was sitting around in the living room.
What?
Yeah. And then for it to actually win the Grammy was the most shocking.
Was that your first win?
Yeah. And I was like, maybe we should never try.
Mind blowing.
Maybe we should never try.
I mean, you joke, but it did make me think about how, you know, I mean, for so many years, the feeling was when you're releasing music, you're releasing something that you feel like you'd taken to the point of completion with great musical and intention.
A lot of
and
artistic,
meticulous attention to detail. And I wondered what it was like to put things into the world that you allowed there to be rough edges, or I mean, what was that like?
Well, I think
doing
it's
that?
more in line with the music I actually like. I love it when you hear mistakes on albums, and so I know we've tried to always honor if a mistake happens in a good performance. It's just what happened, you know? And
If it's not a total clam.
Yeah.
even if it's a total clam, sometimes there's a weird thing that happens when people are a little bit gone in the music. I mean, when the tape is rolling, you know? And oftentimes in the better performance, someone makes a mistake because they're not thinking in a careful way. They're in the performance, you know? That's what I think anyway. Why there happen to be these quote-unquote mistakes on the performance.
I think it gives a little more of a complete picture, or lets people view the music from a different angle. There's always been some of it. I mean, we can go back to, I mean, if we do talk about Soul Journey again, it's like something like Wrecking Ball that's on the end of that. That was a electric jam that then we just turned into something. And
The session had wrapped.
Yeah,
we had officially said, okay, we're done. And everyone was going home the next day. You know, Jim Boquist was flying back to Minneapolis and we just decided to play a little more.
Yeah, I picked up electric guitar and we started through that. And then later I was listening to the 2-inch tape because I'd rolled and I thought, that's pretty special. Like maybe I can cut something together out of this jam, you know, edited some stuff up. And so I think that's always been in there. Sometimes you get very lucky with performance. Like we had written, I remember when we were making about to start the sessions for Time the Revelator, and we'd been on tour some, and we'd written that song and we'd played it some on the West Coast. Maybe there'd been a half a dozen performances, maybe there'd been a dozen, I don't know. And then we'd come back and we'd been off the road for a minute and we'd been setting up RCA Studio B because we'd gotten in there and I'd brought the gear in and I'd wired up the room a little bit.
Because people were not actively using that studio at the time.
At that very moment, yeah, because they were starting to build the new Country Music Hall of Fame and there wasn't any gear in the control room. So I brought in the stuff from home and started setting it up and we started working on a couple more songs that ended up kind of being outtakes or demos. We did some recording, but we did not play any of the new songs. And then all of a sudden I said, well, let's play Revelator. And because we'd gotten the sound pretty good over the course of a couple of weeks and worked real hard on it. I think there was a song called Sourwood Hill, and it wasn't particularly good.
We got Merchant Road.
Yeah, we got a pretty recording of it, but it just didn't have what we wanted. And we're like, let's play the Revelator thing. And we played it, stem to stern, one take. And I mean, that's the record. And I remember that whole guitar solo. I was trying to remember the things that I'd done on stage that I liked, and I kind of go from one thing to the other. But it was such a we just went in to listen to it to see what we needed to do next, or it was like supposed to be. And sometimes your brain, we were both on a path trying to remember it, and it's just a really good string from the first note to the end. I love the way that, that's a fantastic performance. And you get it in one take. And other times you spend 3 weeks and edit things together, and there's 30 edits and something, and the thing that I love about music is if you do it right, you can't tell me. I might be lying. Maybe Revelator is 30 things that are edited together. But you know what I mean? When you do it right,
you might be lying.
You can't tell which is which. And that's what's so exciting about it, is that a performance can be performed, it can be created. It doesn't matter so long as when you hear it, it takes you on the journey that it needs to take you on for you to feel what the song wants you to feel.
You know, years ago, after our second record came out, somebody wanted to use I'm Not Afraid to Die in a movie, in a Western, and their dream was to have it be Dave and myself and Willie Nelson doing the song. And they made it happen. They asked Willie if he'd do it. And so we went down to Willie's ranch and we recorded this version with Willie. And we got the track done, and then we were hanging out in his ghost town, in the saloon, in his Pedernales. I guess.
Pedernales, yeah.
And we're hanging out and we're talking. It was a wonderful morning. It was a wonderful day. Somebody was scrambling eggs and somebody was rolling joints in a Frisbee. But the point was, he said the nicest things about our work and our writing, and he kind of implied that he was a little surprised to meet us, that we were different than he had thought we might be. And he said he had come to believe, he said, you need to put all of yourself into your songs, into your music. He said, if somebody only knew your songs, would they know you? And I never forgot that, and I recognized when he said that no, they wouldn't. They wouldn't know me.
Yeah, and in
They wouldn't know
1998, we hadn't really...
That was just a tiny piece of us. And so I think I've tried over the years to somehow put more and more in to make the picture. If you only knew our songs, now at this point, you would know us better.
Yeah, you don't know if you ever get there, but
Yeah.
yeah, I remember just some of the stuff. I think a lot about putting together the Dream a Highway song and like how much of that stuff, the verses, things in that song, how close they cut at that time and how close they were connected to how bad that what time was in a lot of ways for where we were and what was going on, and just being like, can I do this? Can we put this in there?
It was
Like,
uncomfortable.
What will
Yeah.
it feel like? And I remember singing it, some of it
Yeah.
for you, and we're just like, and then in the end, the answer was you just put it in because it does have, and it's incisive in a particular way, and people do feel, if it's when you listen to a song and you may have not been, you haven't had the same experience, but you can feel the threads and you know what in your life relates to that. And it's just, that's really...
Yeah.
Universality.
Yeah, exactly.
It is.
But,
And- and
universality by being hyper-specific.
Yes.
Like-
And I always give people so much credit. I firmly believe, the basis of what we do and the fact that we have a career is that people can hear the difference. I have the utmost respect for the person listening on the other side of the speakers. I don't know what else to say. It's completely obvious to me that the better work we do, the more people like it, and the more it goes in and becomes a part of their life.
I was thinking about, I used the word canon before, which is something that I think about a lot when I'm thinking about lineages and traditions and so many different spaces. But I was reflecting back on your close attention to the original sources at the beginning and how interesting it is that those were things that you got so close to and ingested so thoroughly, and they motivated you to come here seeking, this world that didn't exist at the time. I think you did a lot to bring to life a new version of it that we're living with. How would you say, when, how, why did you develop that kind of relationship with those, first sources, the brother duos and pre-electric country music and old time music that was so living and animated that it brought you here searching and ready to create and continue?
That's a long answer.
Well, it's like the brother team stuff had a clarity of arrangement and a harmonic and harmony sounds that were really appealing in I don't know how to explain it, but I'm just talking about the auditory, the way the stuff sounded and felt. the
like
lyrical,
I could feel all of it. It wasn't too much to
yeah,
take in.
and it was
I
very raw. But then,
Yeah.
what's funny is you have to balance that with the Townes Van Zandt, Steve Earle, Guy Clark, Emmylou Harris, I could, the list goes on and on and on of the people who were active and who were in Nashville and who were writing singer-songwriter based
Right.
post, whatever you want
Right.
to call it, singer-songwriter post Bob Dylan, Neil Young music, which we also loved, and a lot of the best of that was made here. It was kind of like combining. Because if you listen to the songs, or Peter Rowan or something like that, or Nashville
Yeah,
Bluegrass Band was
absolutely.
incredible here. That stuff, we were taking some of the sound of the Stanley Brothers and some of the rawness and some of the sound stuff that we liked there and combining it with
the craft and the artistry that was in this town when we plunked down here. Not to mention the fact that Bill Monroe is still alive and playing a square dance every Wednesday night out Long Hollow Pike.
Right. Right.
You can get a chicken dinner for $5 and then you can square dance. And Bill, it was going to be your band.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, and I mean, the Monroe brothers were incredible. And even so.
And then add into that, we both love duet harmony. I love it. It really, I don't know what to say. It makes me ecstatic.
Yeah. Yeah, and
love
knowing that it's okay, the Everly brothers, they're beautiful. The Louvin brothers, that's beautiful. But then when you went back a little further and got to the Delmores and the Stanleys and the Monroes, it's like that was the stuff that for whatever reason tickled, floated our boat a little more.
The weirdest stuff. They would just move between octave and unison and hit these more colorful intervals and just play with the sounds because that's what they had at their disposal.
Yeah, the Monroe brothers are a great example of, harmony-wise, Charlie and Bill moving from octave to unison, over the course of, 4 notes, like just doing whatever they could as a duet to make an exciting sound because Bill had a bigger sound in his head. He was about to go and make a band that would change the
Right.
world, but he's still
That's
just
right.
playing with his brother Charlie on guitar and thinking, what all can we do here?
And
Yeah.
in my case, I honestly believe that loud sounds have always hurt my ears. I just don't like them as much as I love putting on a Jimi Hendrix album, and I really do love that. That was never going to work as a band for me. I don't sing that way. I grew up
That is very
singing
true.
alone in my bedroom, and I can't stand anything as loud as a vacuum cleaner.
We're taking one last break. We'll be back with Gillian Welch and David Rawlings to learn more about the complexities of their songwriting, the unfinished nature of folk music, and the joy they feel when someone else sings the words they've written. Stay with us. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. Our guests today are Gillian Welch and David Rawlings, whose songs have been embraced across many genres and by artists of all ages. Senior music writer for Nashville Public Radio, Jewly Hight, spoke with Welch and Rawlings about the evolution of their songwriting, how meaning of their songs changes over time, and the creative dynamics that have shaped their enduring partnership.
When I look at the world that we are living in now in folk and roots music, there are songs that people in spaces ranging from mainstream country to bluegrass bands or Celtic bands, singer-songwriters, indie rock, folkies of a variety of ages too, for decades now have been taking up your songs and performing them live or recording them. And I do remember asking you maybe a decade ago if you thought about legacy, and you said no. But so I'm asking again in a different way.
No, I still don't know.
What it, if if there's something pleasing to you about hearing your songs have those lives, or if it changes the meaning, the worth, how you relate to or hear those songs when you hear them done and redone and cherished. And
I've been nodding my head for a while now. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, the highest compliment is another musician deciding to play your song.
I would actually say that the highest compliment is when you're walking by a campfire somewhere and another like non-professional musician is playing your song.
have you had that experience?
Oh, I mean, that happened so early on with the revival songs. And that's when I knew, wow, like, we'd be somewhere and you'd be walking by a campsite and someone would be playing.
Because that's just pure love. It's still almost like magic to me that the songs go out into the world and they do things and they have these lives that we rarely know.
It's an amazing thing, and it's really interesting to see when a song has a kind of emotional breadth that maybe you didn't think that it had, because you hear a bunch of different kind of performers or different artists or different people take it and make it their own.
I'm also really amazed by what happens to songs over the course of many years, how they change and how they can sort of blossom and take on current meaning. A song like Everything is Free has just kind of gained weight.
Yeah, it still
through
means
the
what it
years.
always meant, but it just
not
got
that it
heavier.
changed meaning, it's just taken it on, it's absorbed more. And something like this last run of shows we did went through North Carolina after Hurricane Helene, and a song like Hard Times, which actually mentions Asheville in the song, it took on crazy emotional resonance.
I think it's funny that eventually your songs kind of beat you up, meaning...
What do you mean?
Well, like when you write them, you're kind of standing up above it and you're looking down at a page and you're moving stuff around. I remember Everything is Free. I remember, these songs, and you're just trying to muscle with them and get stuff that hits you and get stuff that comes out of you down onto that page and that resonates with you. And then as they get older and older, they get bigger than you, and it's like your kids grow up. And then eventually you see all the stuff in them that maybe you didn't see while you were writing it, and you're like, I don't know if I can ever do that again. And it gets bigger than you. And then as you're confronting your next song, you feel like it's, it has become, the parent or whatever. And you're like looking up and going, I hope I can live up to that.
I don't really remember necessarily an album before Woodland where people were listening so acutely for, where are autobiographical details of their lives in these songs. Have you perceived it that way? And if you have, what do you make of that reception?
Well, it's funny. I was talking to a friend recently who was kind of surprised by the album, and we had spoken some over the last chunk of time when we were making the album, and yet still the work itself was a surprise. And I tried to explain. I said, well, I'm a little bit like an aquifer. It's everything is slowly and silently trickling, and it gets clearer and more filtered down, and it doesn't really show on the surface what's happening.
And that was very clear also with the way that the album ended up being called Woodland, and the way that the time rebuilding and the time of just being kind of tethered here had shaped and subtly colored everything about those performances, and in some cases the writing,
the tone, the writing, all of it, the emotion, all of that time just filtered into
I mean, I
the
don't
album.
really read anything that anybody writes about any of it because it wouldn't help so I didn't know that that's true, but I think that I can see it because I also think there was there is a less guardedness to some of this writing where if it felt direct, we didn't do anything to try to couch it
We didn't transmogrify it into folk speak
or do anything.
you know? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what
Which
you
is
mean.
a protective, that's
I mean,
a
but
protective layer.
Yeah, it's protective, but it's also artistic.
poetry,
you can
yeah.
decide what you wanted to do, but I think that the fact that some of the stuff did feel more confessional in a way seemed somehow, and I can't tell you why. Again, it's a filter thing. You don't know why you are artistically where you are, but it felt true to where we were and appropriate.
It also made me think about that choosing woodland for a title is, I think, points attention most specifically here.
Because it kind of says
to your life
home.
experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that was the big strike against it as an album title, is I didn't want to draw attention to this. I didn't want to draw attention to anything, but thinking of some other album title that maybe did a worse job explaining or being an umbrella for it all to live under seemed like an untrue thing to do, or to like a needlessly.
Well, if we'd called it Empty Trainload of Sky, that I have a tricky relationship with using a song title as an album title. Even Revelator, they don't have
changed.
the exact same title.
It's evident at this point in your writing, recording, performing careers, just that you can and have played with form, song form and musical form. I mean, in terms of tradition and folk forms in so many different ways, just illustrated kind of the limitless, potential.
Oh, it's wonderful, because going all the way back to when you said the thing about the brother teams, it's like I remember saying in 1993 or 4 or something, I'm like, well, this isn't a field that's been plowed out all the way. This isn't a row that I'm like, they did it for a little while in the 30s and they kind of moved on. So it felt like there was maybe some ground to cover. And I mean, with the deepest thing about folk music and the simplicity of the form and the way that the totality of emotions and human experience that it has dealt with, which is why you call it folk music. It's like the chicken and the egg. I mean, if it didn't have that, it wouldn't be folk music. But that will never, that form is never going to be finished.
As long as they're humans.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I mean, so many of those duos you're talking about existed for a finite amount of time because one person moved on to the next life or something,
Right.
something
World
like
War
that.
II
Like
was coming.
Yeah.
that too. I mean, I cannot think of a longer lasting, more productive duo.
I think we just, from the beginning, like, when we were first sang together and we thought, well, the singing sounds good, like sounded
We had a
okay.
good natural blend right from the beginning.
Yeah, it was okay. I mean,
okay.
it wasn't exceptional, but it was all right. It was good enough to work with, and the guitar stuff worked pretty well together. And then when we started to understand that in a lot of other ways with the writing and just making, I mean, any of the decisions that you're talking about, that we did pretty well working together with it all.
You just never want to have to say no to your partner too often. And we don't have to, because we tend to dislike the same things.
Or we can get around it. Like if I play some stuff for you and you're like, you hate it, which happens, and nobody likes to be in that position. But then I think about, look, well, why do you hate it? And you're like, oh, well, you hate these things about it, but I like these things about it. So let me change this
But you're
little
talking
bit.
about writing,
But
which is hard.
But it's the same with
Yeah.
kind of everything. It's like the other perspective we both recognize that does make it better. Mm-hmm. We're both like firmly on board that like the contribution, like it wouldn't be as good if
we
weren't.
both like it,
Yeah.
it's better. Yeah.
All right, thanks for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Jewly Hight and Mary Mancini. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. You can comment and tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message at 615-751-2500. You can also find us on Blue Sky and Instagram. And for now, you can still tweet us at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekalona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other.
Just an